This is DM Fitzgerald. I want to thank all my subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, I humbly ask you to. If you have comments and questions, please ask them in the comment section, and I promise to read all the comments and answer them. Now, a while ago I mentioned that I would do more of the lore of the world of Mper, and I've kind of fallen down on that. So I'm going to do this piece to sort of make amends for not doing lore in a while. This piece of lore was actually asked for in one of the comments, so let's roll it. There are two gods on Mper named Marcite, and although they are often confused for each other, they're actually quite different goddesses. Let me explain. Originally, the race we now call Mantuthians lived near the Inner Sea, which is sort of like the Mediterranean here on Earth. They were primarily fishermen and women. At the time, they worshipped a goddess named Flagressa. Her form was that of a giant red octopus. Flagressa was the goddess of all things that lived in the sea, and she helped assure the Mantuthians good fishing. Flagressa was also very fond of children. There were many stories of children that had fallen overboard only to be set back on the deck of the ship by a friendly red tentacle. The Inner Sea was dubbed the Mother Sea, as it's known now. Over the years, Flagressa changed. Nothing that worried the Mantuthians. She was still a friend to their people. Her form changed to a tentacled shark and ended up as just a large gray shark. She still helped people with their hunts. She also acted as a court of last resort. If you had an issue with another person that you felt you were wronged, you could bring it to the goddess and she would help sort it out. What would happen is both parties would go into the water and some blood would be shed. The Great Mother would eat the person who was in the wrong. Also, the goddess didn't lose interest in children. Families that couldn't raise a child for some reason could place a child in one of the many tidal pools. The child would be taken to one of the Great Mother's underwater grottos and cared for. When they were grown, they could return to their families or continue with the goddess. Some of these children that returned came back as priests and priestesses. They proclaimed that the name of the Great Mother was Marcite. The northernmost area of the continent that the Mantuthians were on was a place called the city-state of the Snowlight Mountain. It was a Mantuthian country in and to itself. A more advanced race, known as the Danes, or the Starborn, arrived on the world and conquered all of the other civilizations except for the Mantuthians at the Snowlight and the Mantuthians at the Mantuthian Combine. The siege of the Snowlight Mountain lasted for over a year, and eventually the Mantuthians were forced out. They fled back to the Mother Sea and back to their first home, the Mantuthian Combine. The Danes followed and fought one last battle at the outskirts of the Mantuthian Combine. They were severely beaten by magic they could not comprehend, and they never came after the Mantuthians again. However, it was not a good homecoming. Most of those from the Snowlight felt that the inhabitants of the Mantuthian Combine were country bumpkins. They worshipped the goddess Marcite and followed her ways, whereas most of the males from the Snowlight worshipped demons, and the females from the Snowlight had little or no religion of any kind. The government was changed from small village councils to a triumvirate. Originally, it was 2 females and a male, but as time went on, it was changed to 2 males and a female, and finally, there were no females allowed on the triumvirate. The triumvirate passed laws that favored those from the Snowlight and restricted women's rights. Eventually, they passed the killing ritual law. It went like this. If a man didn't believe that his wife could produce heirs for him, he could legally kill her, with no repercussions. Now, in the Malthusian law books, there is only one instance of that law ever going into effect. There was a young priestess named Marcite. She was one of the children raised by the goddess herself. She killed her husband and said it was because he had consorted with too many demons and they had driven him insane, which was uncommon, but it did happen from time to time. The triumvirate didn't see it as self-defense. They said he was trying to invoke the killing ritual. Marcite was held by the village sheriffs to await trial. However, the people rose up as one and set her free the next day. Some of the sheriffs were involved in freeing her. Marcite continued teaching the Grey Lady's word and was captured again and again. However, each time she was captured, she was freed the next morning. The triumvirate called out the small army that the Malthusian Combine possessed and marched them to the city Marcite had been sighted at. They arrested her right there and made ready to sentence her. They set up a rock at low tide. They engraved the rune of true death on it, meaning that anyone who died under that rune could not be raised from the dead. They filled the tide pool with blood to attract sharks and waited. At first the tide seemed to refuse to come in, but when it did come in, it came in as a tidal wave, which drowned the triumvirate and their soldiers, leaving Marcite and the villagers without a scratch. The apparatus of the triumvirate was dismantled, and the village returned to local rule. The priestess Marcite continued preaching, but her time on the run and the love showed by the people towards her changed some things in her preaching. She preached more about the goddess's compassion and love for her children. There were those who still followed the old ways, but the goddess would have no war between the factions. Years later, the priestess Marcite was wandering the outskirts of the Malthusian Combine, and she came across a wrecked ship. It was a human ship. Now, the Starborn were human, but these people seemed different. She approached them and stayed with them for a while. They learned each other's language. One of the women on the ship was a priestess of the human goddess Chaldicea. The more the two women talked, the more they realized that the two goddesses were pieces of the same god. They were sisters. The goddess Marcite was installed in the Chaldite temples, where she remains ensconced in the Chaldite pantheon. That's the story. If you like hearing history of the world of Mper, please leave a like and a comment and tell your friends. You can hear the latest episode of the Mper adventure here. Thank you for listening.